like to welcome all those who have joined us just now. My name is Martin Wanjohi of High Performance Africa, and our session for today is Strategy in Times of Crisis. And we have two balance scorecard experts. That's Charles Odoch in Kampala, and we have Agnes Ruoro of Strathmore University here in Nairobi. And we have just introduced high performance to the participants who are in. And if, as a participant, if you're there and you have any questions, kindly type them on the chat and we'll be able to answer them as we move on. We will be answering as we move on through. Oh, Charles, oh, sorry. Now you're now able to share.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so Charles, over to you.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, wherever you are. I hope you are all able to see my screen. Once again, my name is Charles Odoch Langoya. I am a regional global partner for Balanced Scorecard Institute, which is headquartered in North Carolina. I'm currently in Uganda. Done quite a lot of work with balanced scorecard systems for organizations on continent and off continent. I'll run you through about 6 slides before I hand over to Agnes. And first of all, an understanding of what strategy is. Some people think strategy is, a plan that gets us from point A to point B. And so we start a 5-year plan and say, okay, between now and 5 years, we should be able to move from point A to point B. Others put up strategic plans and say, okay, this is our commercial logic for creating a competitive advantage. The others consider the plan to be a wish list. Others look at it as a starting point where we begin to do things differently. And others look at it as an inflection point from which we either make performance better and improve it from a declining position. All these considerations can be interrupted at any time. Your movement from point A to point B can easily be interrupted by a crisis. Your logic to create competitive advantage can be destroyed at any time. Your competitive advantage can be eroded as fast as it happens. Like we had the COVID-19 situation where many companies that were having a competitive advantage find themselves at a loss. So our understanding of strategy is really a plan of what we intend to achieve between now and a certain period of time. Napoleon says, unhappy is a general who comes on the field of battle with a system. Things change very rapidly on the ground. And if you go with a well-scripted plan for your battle, you are most certainly going to fail. The whole process of creating strategy starts at a high altitude, understanding who your customers are. And I want to emphasize here that at each of these steps, anything can happen and will disrupt your planning system. Your customers might shift. Their needs will shift at any time, and you'll not be able to respond to their needs in the middle of a crisis. You might set up a mission. That mission may be disrupted by a crisis. A vision, after coming up with your vision, you might think of perspectives. Why do we exist? What value are we creating for our customers? If you're in the public sector, you're probably creating value for government. If you're in private sector, you're creating value for your customers. You have strategic themes and theme results. Which areas should you focus on? These could also be disrupted by crisis at any time. What results do we want to achieve? These results can anytime be disrupted. What are our strategic objectives and how do we map them to create value for our customers and stakeholders? What performance measures, what KPIs do we use to tell us that we are performing? And what strategic initiatives do we put in place? What action points do we put in place to drive our strategy to achieve its results? Now, each of these components can be affected by the emergence of a crisis. Now, the process of going through developing your strategy will require an understanding of who your customers are, what value do they need, what political considerations do you have, what are the values, what are your organization's values, who are your stakeholders, what policy and governance considerations do you need to put in place. All that put together helps you to come up with the strategic themes and results that you'd like to achieve. Then further on, develop your strategy map, identify and select key performance indicators or performance measures, set your performance targets, identify strategic initiatives, then roll these out to your departments and to the employees on the ground, and then develop your operational plans, budgets, set up a reward system, and measure the initiatives and projects that you undertake. A few weeks ago, about a month ago, we had a meeting for directors with the Institute of Chartered Secretaries. What we were looking at was the disruption of the fourth industrial revolution. We were looking at how technology was coming in to disrupt the way we do business, and how businesses that are not tuned to use technology would find a lot of difficulty competing in the next few years. We've seen the emergence of artificial intelligence, taking over the competitive advantage from phones, toys, from whatever we're using. We're seeing the emergence of robotics, the Internet of Things, 3D printing, genetic engineering, and quantum computing. Now, all these, the fourth industrial revolution for some companies in itself is a crisis, because it is now beginning to remove them. Than it used to be. New entrants, the emergence of new entrants because of technology is not going to keep us abreast with competition. And new skill sets are required for us to work in that environment. So that alone in itself created a crisis, and is creating a crisis for so many organizations. We've seen organizations collapse just because they can't keep up with the technology that is coming on board. Then immediately after that, we did not expect this. We got the flu. The Chinese decided to sneeze, and the whole world got a cold. Emergence of several crises will occur, and these can be through elections. We've seen how elections, especially in Africa here, can drive things crazy. You have an election and inflation rates simply jump up, and you're no longer in control of whatever you'd like to do. We have the oil crash, we have booms, we have busts, we have startups, that are beginning to threaten us. Banking systems are beginning to get disrupted by startups, GoFundMe are some of the ways in which you can mobilize resources. And that's already beginning to threaten the systems that we have. Terrorism, wars, financial crisis, and conflict. So in what situation should a crisis find your organization? First one is change, culture, change and adaptability. We all know change is constant, but we know we have to manage it and we have to flourish from it. Whenever a change occurs, we must find a situation of surviving with it. Now, unfortunately, culture, as Peter Drucker says, eats strategy for breakfast, because it finds all of us in a situation where we begin to resist the change that we'll need to put in place. We are so stringent, we are unable to adapt to changes that are occurring, and we can see that as we speak now. We have a crisis before us, but you have people who don't want to wear masks. We have a crisis before us, but you have people who don't want to work from home. They don't believe they can work from home. They believe they must still touch somebody and feel somebody before they can get things done. So this change is going to come in with a need for new skills. I've seen people struggling with how to connect to Zoom, just because this is entirely a new thing that has come on board. We need to eliminate bureaucracies. We may allow people now to work from home. We need to enable innovation, provide adequate resources, manage fear and uncertainties that people face now in the middle of a crisis. Make sure you take care of new customer needs, and above all, communicate, communicate, and communicate. We have a big challenge. Actually, in my country now, we have a challenge. We have a communication from the head of state telling all of us not to get out of the house. And then immediately it's misinterpreted by the local authorities, misinterpreted by the police. And so everybody begins to pick and do whatever they want. So in the middle of a crisis, make sure your communication is very clear, it's consistent, and it's repeated over time for people to begin to appreciate what you'd like them to do in the middle of the crisis. We tend to focus more on operational efficiency. How fast are we creating bottles of mineral water? And less on how we can address the problem of emerging disruptive technologies. What kind of bottles do we need to produce? Do we still need the same type of mineral water bottles? We've seen in the UK, people are now beginning to manufacture water bubbles that you just swallow in, and you don't need a bottle. So while people are looking at technology to change the performance of their organizations, our organizations focus in the middle of this crisis on operational efficiency and less on how to handle disruptive technologies. We also have failed to enable technologies in most of the organizations that we have. We've seen, for example, guys who have been producing masks in the US. The emergence of, one company came up, and one individual actually came up and started producing 3D masks using 3D technology. And a few other companies, threatened to sue and say, look, why are you producing 3D masks? Because we are the only people who can produce the N95 mask. And so we see the emergence of technology, and many of our companies still hang behind. We've seen changes over a very short period of time. We're all familiar with the toy that our babies like to play with, Barbie. Recently, Barbie has been enabled with the artificial intelligence. It can now read, detect, and understand what your child needs. Are we able to take this to education, for example, and make sure our children interact with robots that will enable them to, while at home, study and actually get evaluated by the robots that they interact with. We've seen, in the face of doctors getting infected, robots now going in to check the condition of patients and reporting in case of an emergency, for the doctor to respond. Are we able to enable this technology, the companies that we have? The lack of innovation and entrepreneurship. We have employees that work for us, but they never think about creating new value. They never look at making contributions to improve the products of what the company produces. So that becomes a challenge. We need to create new value. We need to move away from targeting our, low-end consumers, and look at new consumers with new products that they would like to enjoy value from. We also have very limited strategic risk management. We tend to focus more on financial, operational, and compliance risks. When you go for, some of these board meetings, you have people reporting on financial risks, people reporting on operational risks, and compliance risk. But there's very limited reporting on positioning risk, execution risk, and consequences risk. What products are we producing now? If we continue producing them for the next 5 years, what risks do we face? If we drop them now, what risks do we face? If we continue with our execution of strategy at the level at which we're executing, what risks do we face? What are the likely consequences that we have? And so shifting away from the regular financial, operational, and compliance risk monitoring into strategic risk management would help us then to begin to think ahead. We need to introduce scenario planning. We're all aware, in 2019, the US was actually doing a simulation of what would happen if a pandemic, ironically originating from China, a pandemic originating from China hit the US. How prepared would the US be? We had all this scenario planning in place, and there could have been a change in the perception by the leadership team, but they were prepared to handle this pandemic and maybe mishandled it through leadership. But we need to start thinking ahead and planning ahead. When a crisis emerges, you should find your organization strategically aligned. The departments, the units, the individuals within the organization should operate in sync. We should eliminate silos so that, when something emerges, we all know what our mission is, what we are supposed to deliver, and how we can integrate our efforts to support each other during the time of a crisis. Unfortunately, whenever there's a crisis, things get out of hand. We go into mission creep. People begin to do whatever they would like to do. We're already seeing it in the different responses by our government systems here. We have certain ministries beginning to do things they're not supposed to do. The Minister of Health beginning to distribute relief services, something it's not supposed to be doing. And so because people don't have their mission clearly defined, you will have each of them operating on their own. So get your people, your projects, your resources, your products and systems aligned to deliver the strategy, even in the face of a crisis. We have very poor project and initiative management. We have projects that are ongoing, projects that we never close, projects that we do not know whether they are within scope, whether they have the adequate resources, whether they're well prioritized so that we get full benefit from the low-hanging fruits that of the projects that we put in place. In the face of a crisis, are we able to go back and look at each of these projects? What can we shelve for the moment? And what can we continue with to enable us face the crisis? Last and most important is a failure to measure what matters. In strategy, we say, if you can't measure it, don't do it. We need to be able to pick very carefully what we want to measure and continuously learn from what we measure. Remember to track the consequences of each of your objectives. When you run the objective, what result will you see at the end of the day? I'll give you an example shortly. And look out for the signals, but avoid the noise. As executives, you're going to be bombarded with a lot of ideas coming in. Let's do this, let's do that. This is better, this is creating a crisis. And so if you listen more to the noise and less to the signals, the trends that are occurring because of the crisis coming on board, then you get lost. Just a few days ago, we had a journalist ask President Trump, what are your metrics? And his response was, they are here, they're in my head. I listen to people and I take a decision. Now that might be drastic. Make sure you work with leading and lagging indicators. Each indicator should tell you what the next indicator will be. Social distancing. If you have less of the community doing social distancing, then you're going to have more new infections. If you have more new infections, you're going to have more people sick. Each of these would be a KPI along the way. If you have more people sick, you'll need more people hospitalized. If you're having more people hospitalized, you need more ICU beds. More ICU beds would give you an indication that if you have more patients on ICU beds, that's likely to give you more deaths. Now, sticking on the noise gets you into problems. If you stick onto a consequence like the drop in the stock index without looking at what is leading into the drop in the stock index, then you have a very big problem. Basically, I've picked a few of the issues that probably you need to put into consideration as you plan. And I would like to hand you over to my colleague, Agnes, who will take you through strategy, opportunities for strategy at times of crisis. We will take your questions immediately after this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Martin and Charles. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, or should be good night for some. I trust you're well and you're still with us. I want to just share my screen and we take a continuation from where Charles has stopped. So I could, if you allow me, I could begin with a quick introduction of who I am. My name is Agnes Ruoro, and as Martin mentioned, I work for Strathmore Business School in areas of leadership and organizational change management. I'm a certified balanced scorecard professional and a certified coach as well. And one of the things I have noticed over my years of consulting is that we emphasize so much on strategy formulation. We put it very nicely into the drawers in the upper echelons and the top management, and often we miss out on the execution. So I do combine coaching and balance scorecard tools to help organizations not only formulate but also to execute effectively. So for today's session, I'll be highlighting some of the opportunities that are coming out of the COVID-19 situation, and possibly look at how you can get onto the implementation phase or incorporating them into the business continuity plans that you have already existing. And so my first question is, why strategy formulation or a strategic review, and why now? And of course, one of the things that businesses do is that we do proper planning at a top management level. We do draw our strategic plans, which are covering up to 10, 5, 3 years from where we are currently. And we also do draw our business continuity and resilience plans, but often we are unable to anticipate what is likely to happen within that period of drawing or projecting our plans. So what we are seeing with the COVID-19 is that this is, has been defined by strategists as a black swan event. And a black swan event is an event that is highly unpredictable and also which normally has catastrophic consequences for the businesses and across the globe. In this case, we are seeing consequences that are affecting businesses, individuals alike across the globe. And black swan events are normally spaced out. So most of the times organizations do planning, but they cannot be able to estimate their magnitude. And obviously in our case, strategies are drawn at a 30,000 strategic altitude, 30,000 feet. That is so much high. So when you're hit at something at ground level, it's likely to actually take a long time for the strategy to pick it up and incorporate it. And hence our reason for having a session like this, where you're starting to review your strategy without having to wait. Also because we are in shambles right now. We are actually being thrown into different directions by the situation and the crisis. But obviously we want to streamline our activities. For some businesses, it's really for survival. For others, we have enough resources to help us move if only we could be able to plan and incorporate the reality into our strategies. So what does this mean for businesses? One, we have what are called the gray rhinos. When you have a black swan event, businesses have to grapple with how to deal with the event itself and the consequences that it actually brings with it. But additionally, swan events are also significant turning points for businesses, and hence the term gray rhinos, which means that you're likely to also experience other emerging threats that were not anticipated, both in the short term and into the long term. And you actually need to be able to read those signals. Sometimes the signals are very strong. Other times the signals, as Charles said, are weak, and you might not be able to sieve them from the noise. So for you to be able to respond effectively to black swan events and the gray rhinos as they show up, you need to be able to sieve through. And in our case, for example, we are expecting a prolonged economic fallout, partly because governments and businesses were ill prepared for this kind of event. Secondly, the SWAN event has significantly reduced our activity at a business level. And thirdly, it is continuing to unfold. We actually don't know how it will look 1 month from now, 2 months from now. Again, strategists are saying that it's something that is going to be with us for a year plus for some organizations, and governments will be able to handle it and put it under control. But within the African context, we think it's going to be a big stretch for businesses and at a national level. And of course, what we are also seeing is that there's certainly going to be a new normal. When we finally get under control, we won't be going back to what we knew was the normal. So again, this is a new wave of disruptions, and we need to be prepared to take up the opportunities that we can see in the market, and of course, mitigate the threats that are being presented to us. And so what I'm presenting to you here is some tools that could help you to really do a deep analysis to help you monitor the external uncertainties, and to also help you to have a robust scenario planning and modeling. At the extreme outer lane, we have the macroeconomic and environmental factors. And these are majorly at a global and international level. These are the kind of things or factors that are not within your control as a business. They are affecting businesses, governments, nationally across the board. And what is differentiating your ability to go through them is how you're going to respond to those factors. At the inner level, we are seeing the industry or competitive factors. At the inner layer, we are seeing stakeholders and the operating environment. So I want to just take you through the 3 levels that you need to pay a little bit more attention to before you can take a deep dive into what your organization possesses in terms of capabilities and resources, so that you can make very informed decisions when you're now looking inner into what the business is capable of doing. So one is global and national factors. It's advisable that before you start to analyze what your business is capable of doing, you take a comprehensive assessment of the global and national factors. One, because they're going to most likely have a big implication for your business. And secondly, because you may not have control over what those factors look like or how they will affect your business. So of course, we are already seeing a recession and a depressed economy, which basically means business models will have to rework how they're going to approach the market as they incorporate the realities. And we're also expecting reduced disposable incomes at an individual level. The other thing we are seeing is that there's lots of talk of physical and social distancing. Well, it's been said to be social distancing, but in essence, what it is doing is that it's actually forcing people to almost have no movement, which basically extends the physical distance. And businesses that depend on high traffic, human traffic, especially like malls and other areas which are retail that are driven by human demands, are already receiving a lot of heat because of just such kind of government directives and instructions. Then we have policies and legal frameworks that we expect will be changing as we go, as businesses try to make the best out of their situation. And already we are seeing big winners in digital and technological spaces. We expect that new markets are going to emerge. We are going to have new frameworks of operating, and which is good, because I think that sometimes the businesses have delayed to invest in technology because there's already something that is working within the business. It may not be as efficient as when you employ technology, but it just works. So why fix when it's not broken? Then at an industry level, some of the factors that we are already seeing is that customers are having substitutes. It's becoming easier to substitute, especially within situations like this of a crisis. I think for most of us, for example, if you're working from home, you realize that you can actually run your home on autopilot for the ladies who are here. You can literally almost get everything by sending the riders. Of course, the question is, how safe is this? But it's an alternative to the business. I mean, it's an alternative for you, or a substitute to what you ordinarily used to do. We're also seeing that and expecting that there's going to be a huge demand for home offices. And obviously, if you're renting office space as a business, if you can be able to get more people working from home, you realize you have idle capacity and you might want to let go of that capacity. Then in terms of learning, we've already shifted quite drastically to online learning, like we do have on this platform. So face-to-face in terms of learning is also really changing. And of course, businesses are going to respond to that and identify some opportunities, while others will be kicked out of business. Then we have a new normal where consumers realize they can do away with some of the things they have been using. And of course, that means that you need to be aware of the shifting consumer preferences and respond to them accordingly. In terms of supplies and cross-sector synergies, we've already seen that there's huge, massive disruptions to those who are relying on imports of raw materials. And many businesses are opting to look at alternatives that can be sourced locally, or more cost-effective ways of getting their raw materials. At the very inner level, which is the third layer of environmental factors, is your operating factors, which are more closely related to your everyday activities, majorly around your stakeholders. One, we are seeing that customers are really at a point where they are making changes to their consumer behaviors and attitudes. And therefore, as a business, this is one of the areas you really need to pay attention to, and to be attuned to where their preferences are moving to, so that you can also be able to ship your products to continue to meet their needs. Then we have suppliers and credit obligations. For reduced business activity, one of the big implications is that you're not probably going to have inflows of cash. And they say that cash is king. So if you don't have cash flowing into the business, either because of forced shutdowns or reduction in activity, you may want to reconsider your obligations and renegotiate them with your suppliers. If you have bank facilities, you may want to renegotiate terms, and also to actually request for some help from your creditors, your credit facilities. Then, of course, one of the biggest concerns right now is employees. And of course, there are also obligations on the side of employees. I have been reading a lot of HR stuff, because many times I have seen that some employees have already been sent home, and of course others have been asked to accept reduced pay. But all these decisions have an implication on the business. And to your business partners, you also need to be looking at the kind of engagements you can have with them that don't expose you as a business. And so when you look at those three factors as a business, then you will be going inwardly to look at, how do we move from there? And at this point, I'd like to hear, at least at this point in time, how are you responding to the business crisis as it is for you? I invite you to type on the chat, but also I'd like to hear your voices. Sometimes online is a bit different from the face-to-face. So sorry, I think I got muted at some point. So I'm inviting you, Martin, if you can get to unmute the people. We will use the raise hand functionality.
Even the reader is not aware. What they did is a review only. They is not aware about the data. The other one is still there. And she didn't tell me about the review for this other one.
Yeah. So what? Hello. Okay. So what we have done is everybody can be able to unmute themselves. Mm-hmm. So that if someone has a question, they can either type in or unmute themselves and ask. Mm-hmm. Because when I unmuted everyone, I had there was so much
lots
noise
of noise.
Coming in. So I said, yes.
Yeah.
So I think someone who has a question can unmute themselves and then introduce themselves and ask the question.
I'd also suggest to use the raise hand functionality under participants, and I'll be able to just call out the name so that we also have a sequence of how the questions are coming in or comments. But in this case, I'd like to hear so much about how you're responding as a business and what are the kind of things you are identifying.
Okay, so as we wait for a question or something, they already have two questions. Yep. One was how best can business respond to uncertainties with no defined duration period? For instance, the current COVID-19 pandemic is yet to be defined how long it shall take to be contained, and therefore businesses might need to re-strategize several times along in the long run of the pandemic.
I think that is going to be actually the next slide. I have a slide that talks into that. We can talk about it then.
Okay. Then there was another question maybe by, there has been reduced global business and in the freight sector has been greatly affected. How can this be addressed?
Which sector, sorry?
Freight, logistics.
Freight, yeah.
Yes.
Okay, I suggest we take the questions at the end, Martin, if you allow, so that we get to hear how people are responding. We will have a slot for the questions. I guess they are the ones coming up first.
Yes.
Thank you. Any comments or do we proceed?
The questions from the audience, you can mute yourself. Okay, you can unmute. You have the option to unmute yourself and ask the question.
Or to raise your hand.
Yes. Okay, I think let's go on.
I guess then we will continue. We'll come to the comments as we take the questions. So one of the things, and I think we'll be responding to the question that has just been asked, is how can businesses respond? Do we need to re-strategize? And the answer is yes, we need to re-strategize, and not just re-strategize and keep our strategy document as is. You need to continue re-strategizing and actually have sort of like a working document, which is your life strategy. So I have 3 levels that I would, I'm recommending that you consider to help you redraw your strategy. Of course, we know that at the beginning of 2020 or your new financial year, you already have a strategic plan that is what was supposed to direct your business into the short, medium, and the long term. And with times of crisis, most likely that strategic plan is not going to serve you. So one of the things you need to actually do is to engage with the board of directors, who are more or less the custodians of the strategic drawing process with your CISO, to help analyze on a continuing basis, one, your enablers. These are going to be your capabilities, your strengths, and your business opportunities. This is a live process, something that keeps, it's an ongoing process. And as well, to always look out for challenges that your business already has. A time of crisis like this exposes a lot of organizational weaknesses. This is the time to pick out those cues and look at what are the implications of these business weaknesses. Again, the external environment poses a lot of threats to your business, as we have already seen. Some are struggling with survival. Others, of course, are thriving because it's an immense opportunity for them. But it is ideal that you actually revisit the strategic document that was already sort of like your Bible. The next level, and Charles already mentioned this, is to actually put on top gear your risk management teams. Ordinarily, you have a team that looks at your normal risk management, the normal risks that the business is exposed to when there are no such black swan events or when there are no threats coming from uncertainties. Then there is your emergency crisis team. In times like this, you're going to find yourself in a lot of emergencies. Why? Because this is a complex emergency. It's an emergency that we don't know, first of all, how it's unfolding. And it's a moving target. So every time there's something new, there's new information that you actually need to incorporate into your business continuity plans. And then there is the crisis, not only the COVID-19 itself, there's the gray rhinos I talked about. The things that you actually cannot anticipate now, you probably have some signals that can help you to make sense of what your business continuity plan should look like. And you should use all of this information to help you redefine and redraw your strategy. We have already seen, for example, in the Kenyan market, universities were already asked to shut down. That's a forced shutdown over a month ago. Imagine how universities across the country are managing. And it's not just in Kenya, it's in many parts of the globe. About almost 200 countries have no school going kids anymore. What does that mean for the ecosystem? It means they really have to employ their business continuity plans. The third layer, which is also very useful at times like this, is your everyday, your day-to-day operations. One, we have what we call emerging strategies. Most of the emerging strategies will come bottom up, unlike your strategy, which is top down. Emerging strategies normally will be picked out from your everyday operations, and we have two levels of operations. At the top of the value chain analysis in the screen, you'll see the inbound logistics, operations, outbound logistics, marketing, sales, and whatever service or product you're selling. Now, those are your revenue generating activities. At an organizational level, you need to keep questioning that value chain. How is value being created? Are there resources that we can reroute to other areas? Is there idle capacity? How do we deal with it? At the lower level, we have the support activities. That is the IT, technology infrastructure, the HR, the general operations, and the internal supply chain. Those support activities have been called cost centers, but they should actually be driving value for the business. And this is going to be an iterative process that helps you to identify the areas where resources are either stretched or where there is an over investment in resources. So for example, I was in a forum for university leadership, and they were asking, how can we move to virtual? And the regulator is saying, well, if you consider a case of going virtual, for example, 100%, you will need to think about accessibility, connectivity. Imagine that person in Samburu who has just gone home and they cannot be able to come back to Nairobi. How are they going to access materials? Of course, it's going to be difficult for them. And some of the institutions are ready to go virtual and some are not. So if some are ready and others are not, what does that mean? The regulator will want to have everyone on board to be able to get all the institutions moving at the same pace. I saw Professor Magoha being asked when are schools resuming, and he said, your answer is as good as mine, which is basically to say, we just cannot, we can't see when that day is going to be. So we don't know. But there are some institutions that have opted to actually continue with virtual learning. And one of the realization is they invested in virtual platforms a long time ago. They've already been spending capital to pay to maintain those platforms, but they are not utilizing them. This is the time to keep questioning your value chain to identify those elements that can be put to better use, and to also reroute where there's an overstretch. And so I recommend that every business looks at these 3 levels and of course work in tandem to be able to pick out the areas where the new business plan looks feasible. And of course, that also means looking at the resilience of the organization. So ideally, in a situation like this, you may have to partially depart from your strategic plan as it looked before the black swan by employing your business continuity, but also to continuously keep reviewing and updating it so that it reflects the reality that is coming from the external factors, as well as your internal capabilities. Now, the question, are you ready to adjust to the new normal? I think already the new normal is getting defined. We may not have all the facts to help us to see how it looks. And for businesses, the fog may be too thick for you to actually feel confident to rework your strategy. Even with incomplete information, encourage your leadership team, your operations team to have their ear on the ground so that you can continue to sharpen your assessment, because any situation is going to have winners, there's going to be losers. You don't want to be that person who's already losing when there are opportunities that you can leverage. So don't waste the crisis. I'll look briefly into the emerging opportunities as we are seeing them. And the first one, which has already been mentioned earlier by myself and Charles, is technology and digital solutions. One of the things we are already seeing is that e-services are greatly affected. Any touchpad, any scanning technology that requires you to authenticate with your finger is a risk point for the spread of coronavirus, for example. And so we expect that there's going to be more solutions that are authenticating using remote solutions, and also contactless payments. Of course, what that means is that there are going to be new entrants into the technology space. So for example, in the case of our market here in Kenya, and perhaps it's the same in other countries in Africa, we have just maybe up to 4 or 5 telecommunications companies. So in the case, for example, Safaricom at this point, how much is the stream of data, for example? They are already a big winner in that space. They are already a big winner in terms of contactless payments. And we would expect that looking at the entry barriers, it will be possible to actually look at opportunities there that can be taken up by other businesses. The other opportunity is remote work solutions. Companies have already realized working from home is the safe thing to do. Even if your employees have been working from work, there are possibilities that more companies will be willing to actually get people working from home. And therefore, conferencing facilities, knowledge management is going to be a big thing. There are already platforms, but they are not being used. Data privacy, again, is going to be a big opportunity for tech and digital solutions. And of course, there is virtual learning. I was speaking to Martin and saying how Businesses have realized that there's so much opportunities to learn virtually. Corporate trainings, for example, is normally the first thing to be scrapped, but there's an opportunity to move that kind of learning to online. Then future of work. This relates to people, and of course, one of the biggest implications is decrease in business travel. There's going to be a lot of emergence of virtual workplaces and robotic automating, which basically will mean that there will be a lot more flexi work and remote working. And there's going to be an increase in demand for home office furniture. Of course, also that probably means that the demand on real estate is going to be more on upgrading already existing home structures as opposed to rental space. And of course, this is a trying time for employees, individuals across the board. So we expect that demand for psychologists, counseling is going to go up because there are a lot of mental issues, emotional issues that are emerging with the situation. And that is likely to have an impact on how businesses are putting together their wellness systems. Then we have the healthcare ecosystem, which depending on which side you're on, is both an opportunity and a stretch at the same time. We expect that there's going to be a lot more allocations by governments and businesses in terms of healthcare systems. And of course, we have already started seeing the big winners who are able to produce the protective gears, the Kitui factory that shifted and is producing 30,000 masks. All those are opportunities. Then we have an opportunity for cross-sector innovations, where a business may have partial capacity, but they can merge with another business to produce something that is of use to the shifting consumer demands. Then we also think that local manufacturing suppliers are going to win, depending on what you're supplying. And of course, because of safety, reliability, and accessibility, of course, the partial lockdown could affect access to distribution channels, but also companies will be trying to utilize their idle capacity so as to meet the demands that are already shifting at a very high rate. This is the last one. We have social interaction platforms where the demand for social activities, let's say, for example, families wanting to connect is going to go up. While there's already video conferencing solutions, these are more focused on businesses, targeting business, but we think that there's going to be something that is able to create a solution for just basic social friends and family kind of engagements. Then of course, online entertainment. This, I think most people have already been affected by it because you're working from home, your children are also at home, and you realize you're unable to actually keep them engaged throughout the day. So this is going to be one of the places where there's going to be more opportunities. Then we expect more family bonds, family games, which is good for families and for social well-being. And of course, with that goes the projected baby boom some few months from now. Then at educational level, beyond people having an appetite for online learning, education systems are going to realize opportunities that replace the face-to-face. One is internationalization, because there will be access to global education platforms. And then there's already an emergence of homeschooling programs. And with this homeschooling, parents will prefer to actually work fewer hours. And so pushing for that to be incorporated into current employment contracts, so that they can be able to integrate a little bit better on the home front. Then lastly, we have logistics, and there was a question on logistics. Retail is already a big winner on this. I think there's already people warming up to the fact that they can actually shop online. It may not be 100% safe in the situation we are in, but they are more open to actually doing more of that. And I think even bigger businesses, there's going to be a lot more readiness to just do procurement and supplies ordering more online. one of the biggest challenges also is going to be, how do you move goods from point A to point B? I think this is one of the challenges. It's a big challenge at this moment, because there's already reduced movement. Of course, governments have blocked boundaries. So
Yes,
I expect that organizations are going to look more internally and be more willing to innovate together with local manufacturers. And lastly, we have the last mile deliveries to homes, to your doorstep. I think that those are some of the opportunities that incorporate. There are so many other opportunities, but I will want to stop there and to obviously encourage you to keep learning, keep evaluating your plans, because eventually there will be emerging winners. And those emerging winners will be determined by how quickly you are able to turn your lemon into lemonade. Thank you.
Thank you, Agnes. So we have a few questions, but maybe from a question to which either Charles or you can take on. Companies being in the middle of things right now, where should they start, or where do they start?
Charles, you could go first.
I just want to say, we need to always ask ourselves, how much have we learned from whatever is happening now? And how much are we willing to adjust the way we do things to make sure that next time we have a situation like this, we do not get, the situation impacting on the way we do things. During the H1N1 virus infection again in Asia, the Koreans actually learned from their mistakes. And out of their own mistakes, they were able to come up with a solution. They came up with a solution of using mobile phones to track whoever is positive and whoever interacted with a person that is positive. Once your two mobile phones got close to each other, they would immediately call you and say, yesterday you passed me a guy who was positive. And so you need to come in for a test. So these new things that we pick up, we need to really begin to look at how do we improve the way we do things. Of course, technology is going to be a key driver. And then, as I mentioned earlier on, we need to plan some of these scenarios before. You do not anticipate a crisis this year, but of course, if anything happened 1-2 years from now, how are we going to respond? Unfortunately, we do have a lot of our risks identified, but we do not run simulations to prepare for them. So when we get out of this, let's intensify the simulations, make sure, if you're running a bank, you should be able to, at the moment, run the bank from home, work from home. How are you going to make sure customers' transactions are processed while you're at home? Do we have the technology to do that? Is our IT team ready to convert all of us to turn our homes into disaster recovery sites? I think basically that's what I have. Agnes, if you have anything to add.
Although you have said it, but probably in different words, I would say, even if you're in the middle of things, it is very critical that you acknowledge that there's actually something that is coming with a very strong wave to interrupt your middleness. So there is going to be the consequences of these unprecedented times that we are in, and there is going to be other unfolding realities. So it is wise that you actually start to do a reforecast gap analysis, a reforecast strategic review, so that you incorporate those elements that are actually coming into your environment that could affect whatever it is that you're doing. So my recommendation, in addition to what Charles has said, it is actually wise for you to start to slow down or to a near pause, to actually incorporate the realities that are there, so that your gap analysis identifies the new challenges, the new threats, but also helps you to identify some of the organizational resources that you could already utilize, because those are going to be your enablers, and as well be able to utilize your key strengths as a business. Thank you.
Martin,
okay, so yes?
We had a question from somebody on supply chain.
Yes.
I'd just like to add a few, on what Agnes has put across, because this is one of the most difficult aspects of managing this crisis. Currently, we are depending on resources, raw materials, resources coming from outside. In the long term, I don't know whether it's possible for us to, put a lot of emphasis in creating in-continent resources so that we do not have to depend a lot on getting resources from across the continent. The risk, of course, is very high. Just this yesterday, we got 2 truck drivers crossing into Uganda, both tested positive. And of course, along the way, they will keep going on infecting, other people. But how can we then create a very powerful data network where we actually depend and eliminate the risk from the source of the supply chain to give confidence to the people on the demand side? Because what you have with supply chain now is you have a reduction in demand because people are very scared of ordering for new products from areas that are infected. So is there a possibility of having very high level of risk management at the supply end to give confidence to those on the demand side? So that will require a lot of interaction, creating trusted networks, making sure that you're confident that what you're supplying is good, apart from getting it from a source that is locally procured. Thank you.
Okay, so as we've taken a few questions, and maybe one thing we might say as we're closing, and anyone with a question can type into the chat and we can respond to it. We ran out a survey on remote working, and one thing out of the nearly 70 HR practitioners who took part in it, the future of work arrived and we were not ready. We have been talking about the future of work for quite a number of years in conferences and seminars, but we were caught completely off guard. But sometimes it's not what we do, but it's not what we think about a situation, but basically rather what we do about it. So maybe if there are any questions, any comments from all the participants, we'd like to thank over the 106 participants from both East Africa and West Africa. And just to inform everyone, we have quite a number of sessions running. This is the 5 days of e-learning. So we have 2 days, Thursday and Friday, about learning and development. And then on the 22nd, we have something about performance management. We'd like also to welcome you to those sessions again. And as we are trying to wind up, I'm just holding to see if there is any burning question from any of the participants. Okay, I see a hand raised. Let me just mute you up. Emmanuel? Okay, Emmanuel, you had something to say. I've just unmuted you. Maybe you could share with us. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much for the wonderful presentation. We've all learned a lot. Somebody asked a question that where does an organization have to start from in this time of crisis? I just want to add, and most importantly, there's a need for every organization to begin to look inward first, before even looking out for opportunities, external opportunities, you need to look inward and see if you have the right culture, see if you have the right structure, because even if all these things are not in place, it might be difficult for you, taking advantage of those emerging external opportunities. Some organizations do not even have strategic plans. You don't have plans. You have not built, capacity and competencies over time so you're not flexible to adapt to, to change. So those are the things you need to look out for and begin to work from inside and see how you can reposition your organization, to take advantage of those emerging opportunities. So you need to look at your structure, you need to look at your culture, then you need to look at your organizational leadership, because everything boils down to leadership. Leadership dictates the vision, the leadership dictates the mission, and it's cascade down, to the lower rung of the organization. So leadership needs to begin to look at themselves. Are we doing the right thing? Are we on the right track? Are we setting this organization on the right track to deliver on the objectives? Our objectives, are they even clearly stated? The employees at every level of the organization, do they even know, what the objectives are? Are they clear on it? Are we doing enough communication? So these are the things that we need to ask ourselves, from the organizational level. And in terms of opportunity, I also want to add, this is Africa. I'm from Nigeria, and then I also want to believe that agriculture is very key to us, If you're looking at opportunities in the agricultural sector, I think that is key. Now, we need to begin to look at the way we do agriculture and begin to leverage on technology. You understand? Now, the supply chain is being disrupted. Some of our manufacturing companies who get their, material, their input from overseas are not being able to do that. So we need to begin to look inward. Some of these things, they might be need for government to now begin to empower all these small scale, farmers, helping them with technology so that they can produce more, because it will also benefit everybody, benefit the government, and then benefit, the farmer. So for me, there's a lot of opportunities in the agricultural sector that everybody begin to look at. Now, on the part of government, the government also needs to do something. Like in Nigeria now, we have a pool of funds being donated by some people. And because of lack of trust between the citizens and the government, everybody is not comfortable. Government will tell you today that they have shared so amount of money, and the people will keep asking, how did they share it? Because there's no verifiable database. There's no database. On what place you begin to hand cash to people, how can you account for that? So government needs to build trust. Government needs to build acceptance. We should begin to have a general database of every citizen in our country. By this, I think we can come out of this crisis and begin to tell ourselves the truth that at least we have achieved something going forward. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much, Emmanuel. Now, I think we need to wind up. We've actually exceeded the session by about 13 minutes so far. But as we wind up, we'd like to thank, yes?
Just
Charles,
1 minute,
sorry.
Martin. I just want to add something on what Emmanuel has sparked my thinking. Africa is a continent with the hugest disease burden. If there is any continent that should know how to identify a vaccine, it should be Africa. So what puzzles me is that why don't we learn from this and become the solution to the world's vaccine need, the world's cure for diseases? That's a very, in the long term, I think Africa needs to learn from this and take advantage, take that opportunity. Thank you.
Okay, so just to finish up, I think from what we're seeing, organizations need new competencies to achieve their strategies. If we didn't have a competency of working from home, we have to get it as quickly as possible, and so as to be able to have a continuity. Just before, there was a question about business continuity plans. Yeah, in this time of uncertainty. Today you wake up this way, in the evening you find, no, you can't move to another place. How do the organizations handle that? Let me throw that to Agnes.
I think most great organizations, not just good ones, but great organizations actually operate with business continuity plans in place. Normally, a business continuity plan is a plan that envisions that should there be an interruption to your business, you can quickly get together and rework how you're going to move forward, and you actually stand on your feet. Now, what happens is that the business continuity plans may either be sufficient. A black swan event that is not to this level of magnitude is likely to be one that you can go over without much struggle. But in our case, with this COVID-19 situation, the magnitude is so big and the consequences and implications to business is so high. So of course, the first thing you need to do is to actually focus on the survival of the business. That is so critical because there's some businesses that are going to die, whether we like it or not. And for some, it could be that they didn't have the right resources to be able to get back on their feet quickly. But for others, it's possibly that they didn't do the planning adequately, and so they were caught flat-footed. So the best organizations will have to employ their business continuity plan and say, it is good, we realize we cannot continue to achieve what we anticipated, we will work with this. The other one is where you realize as a business, it is very complex for you to come up with a reviewed strategy or a resilience plan. In many cases, if a business doesn't feel confident in their own internal capacity, they will engage experts. So you will really work with your strategic consultants to help you come up with a business review and to also work with you during the implementation. But of course, you should be very careful when you're selecting to ensure that you're getting an expert who has experience, because working on continuity plans for scenarios like this is very different from coming up with your usual strategic plan. So working with experts and also being able to do a bit of scenario modeling and forecasting. The biggest strength is to actually work out the different scenarios that are likely to play out. There's a lot of information actually at the moment on how different countries are being affected. And when you look at how countries like China and mostly the Asian countries have responded, you can start to see how the scenarios are playing out. For example, how China responded, how Taiwan responded despite being just neighbors, how South Korea responded. If you go to Europe and look at how the countries have responded, each of them have used very different response mechanisms. Some are doing a great job at containing and mitigating, others are not doing a good job. So as a business, I think this is the time to actually have your ear on the ground to pick the right signals. And Charles talked about signals that are actually, flashing on your face. Some you will see, some may not be obvious. So you need to have a full spectrum kind of perspective, not just looking inwardly into either your business, your industry, and country dynamics, but looking globally, because this is a global crisis. You can't afford to just sit in the boardroom and start to structure a scenario that only looks at what you're capable of doing.
Okay, thank you very much, Agnes. Yes?
Martin, what we can let our participants know is that Agnes and I can help do two things, do a business continuity gap analysis and then a strategy management gap analysis. A simple matrix we can share with you, so you can send an email to Martin and then we help you do a simple gap analysis. Do you have gaps in your strategy? Do you have gaps in your business continuity plan? Thank you.
I am sharing my email on chat for anybody wanting to take up that from Charles. My email is martin@iPerformanceAfrica. So Charles has offered we can do some review of the business continuity plan gaps. So you can get in touch with me on my email, martin@iPerformanceAfrica. There was a question which I've just noticed, someone in the banking industry wondering how they're going to deal with customers. So I think just to respond to that question, with the banking, well, there would have to be reduced interactions with the customer, online platforms to withdraw and to make payments. and a proper queuing methodology. But for any question that you might have, you can email it to us, and we shall be able to respond to you in details. I think
Martin, I want to add to the question on banking.
Yes.
I was talking to one of the strategists in one of the banks, and I was asking them how they are handling the situation, because they are supposed to be operational. So they have a branch in Mombasa, and of course we know that is one of the hotspots right now in Kenya. And one of the things they have done is that they have split their staff members into two groups. So they have team A and team B who work in shifts. Now, being a hotspot, it so happened that one of the staff tested positive. What does that mean? It actually meant all the people who were in that team had to be isolated immediately. And so what happened is that the other team had to split into two, and they are now stretched with a 25% capacity. And of course, if you're reduced to 25% of your capacity, it's going to be very difficult for you to give good service to your customers. And I therefore totally agree that educating your customers to also reduce their face-to-face interactions is going to be one of the best ways. And where possible, to actually look for alternative ways of solving and meeting their needs. But also it's important for employers to consider providing the right protective gear to the extent that the healthcare systems are providing, because the risk is so real. And sometimes the risk is not your internal person who moves every day to home and back. It will be some of the customers that you're serving. So trying to look for innovative ways of preventing, you know, like the directives that the government is sending to us on a daily basis should be some of the areas where employers start to think about, if you have a team, however lean, working, and interacting with customers or suppliers or whatever other level of engagement, it's worth thinking about how to protect them so that they can also feel safe. And of course, safety comes first for every employer and individuals alike. Thank you.
Okay then. Thank you very much for everyone. In case of any question that we didn't answer or you didn't get to ask, you can email us, you can email me the question and we will get a response sent to you. We'd like to thank everyone who's joined us today. Join us tomorrow, the same time, for learning and development sessions. We have 2 sessions around learning and development on Thursday and on Friday at 11 to 12 p.m. So thank you very much for everyone, and everyone have a nice day. Have a great day.
Thank you.